Yes, it's 1, 2, 3. Simply 1, 2, 3. Easy as can be. Learning 1, 2, 3.
So here we are today with Mr. Ian MacTavish, one of Australia's more respected wine reviewers and writers. And we're going to have a little talk about Australian wine and just some of the basic information first, but we hope to grow this series over the next few months, and so we can build up an understanding of what makes Australian wine so particularly good. So so Australia's a big country. Do we make wine everywhere, or is it regionally based, or what's the story?
Well, we do actually. I should say hello to everyone first. So hello. Glad you could come and have a bit of a listen to us. Hope you've got a glass of wine sitting beside you so you can get some inspiration as we're talking. But Australia is a very big country. But Australia is about the same size as continental United States. The distance between Sydney on the east coast and Perth on the west coast is about the same as New York to Los Angeles. The major difference in Australia is pretty much desert in the middle. Most of Australians live right around the coastline, and there's not very much happens in the middle. The Tropic of Capricorn, our southern tropical line, passes about through the middle of Australia. So above that, we're into the tropics. The top of Australia is quite near the actual equator, and the bottom of Australia, which is another few thousand miles down, is it's getting close towards the Antarctic. So you've got a fair range of climate for a start, and they've also got the usual variables about soil. But so most of the Australian wine areas are gathered around the south coast and a little bit of the southeast coast. So you've got New South Wales on the eastern coast. Below that is Victoria. Below that is our little island state of Tasmania. And then working our way across the mainland again, you've got South Australia and then Western Australia, all quite simply named. And we have variable conditions and variable grapes growing in different areas, yeah.
Yes, there's quite a climactic difference between those areas, isn't there, really?
Yes, there is. And with a lot of discussion these days about the effect of the climate and global warming, it does make a difference where your grapes are growing. You can be in some of our hottest areas are in the west of New South Wales along the Murray River and the northwest of Victoria, which is largely irrigated areas where we grow great quantities of good quality grapes, but they're mostly used in our lower priced wines. But then you can go to special areas which are in cooler areas where there's much more appreciation of the singular climates where we grow some of our more spectacular wines, our higher priced wines.
Going back a few hundred years, where were wine grapes first grown in the country?
The white arrival in Australia to produce modern Australia is only 250 years ago, when the first fleet arrived in Sydney in 1788. They were carrying some grapevines on board because they'd come from England via the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, and picked up some vines there. So the first vines were actually planted where the city of Sydney now is, and of course that was soon overrun by the need for the developing colony. So our first real wine region, and this is probably 30 or 40 years after, into the 1800s, is the Hunter Valley, which is about 2 hours north of Sydney. And then the other parts of the colony fell quite quickly, in Melbourne and Adelaide, and so those were the major areas of grape production in the early days.
Okay, so where are the best areas for wine production now? I take it's mostly southern Australia?
Yeah, it's in the southern areas, and I think the quality wines we're looking for now, we're mainly concentrating on cooler areas. One of our more recent growth areas is Tasmania, which is, I say, is our island state, which is just south of Victoria, across the Bass Strait. And this is very cool because it's getting close to the South Pole, and but also has a lot of hilly areas. And so the way to produce good quality grapes is to either be in a cooler area with lower temperatures, or move up the hills a bit. And the higher you go up, obviously the temperature becomes cooler as well. So our fine wine areas now are places in Victoria and Tasmania, and also Western Australia, which the fine wine areas there have come upon comparatively recently. The areas south of Perth, which is the capital, is Margaret River, and even further down south, the Franklin River area there.
What wine varieties are you talking about when you mention Australia's fine wines? Are there any particular varieties at all?
The grapes we grow in Australia have obviously come from Europe initially, mostly from France, and our fine wine grapes are grapes that you will find growing in France and, of course, in other parts of the world like California and Oregon. First, probably our premier red grape would be Shiraz, or Syrah, they call it in France, and this has grown pretty well all over the Australian districts. It can make pretty ordinary cask wine, but reliably ordinary cask wine, or it can make great wines like Australia's famous Grange, which is probably really only our first growth wine, and that's made from the Shiraz grape. We also have Cabernet, and we have a couple of areas which do really, really well with Cabernet. That's the Coonawarra area of South Australia, and also the Margaret River area in Western Australia. In our white wines, Chardonnay is probably the white equivalent of Shiraz. It's grown all over in all districts, and it will survive in any kind of temperatures or rainfall and produce a half-decent wine. But the best ones, again, are in the slightly cooler areas like Victoria, the Yarra Valley, and also down in Tasmania. Other whites we grow. We do grow Riesling originally from Germany, and there's a couple of really good places in South Australia, the Clare Valley and the Eden Valley. One of the grapes, another French grape, which is grown in the Bordeaux area, but we have a special way of treating it here, is Semillon, which we grow in the Hunter Valley, and it's a totally unique wine in the world, the way we make that. It starts off as a very young, almost thin, dry white wine, which is quite refreshing with simple seafood, but actually it can age for 20 or 30 years and it turns into a lovely golden, toasty, rich wine, which is unlike anything I've tasted anywhere in the world.
Really?
So they're the major grapes. Pinot Noir, which is the great grape of Burgundy. We are growing again in cooler areas like Victoria, the Yarra Valley and around there, and also we're growing some in Tasmania as well, and also a couple of the cooler areas in South Australia, up in the Adelaide Hills outside the capital of South Australia.
I've read recently that a lot of the drier wines, say from Portugal and Greece, that haven't been tried here before, are starting to take hold in places like Queensland's Granite Belt.
Yeah, definitely. That's one area I haven't mentioned, Queensland's Granite Belt, which is, you would think, too far north to actually support grapes, is actually quite a reasonable altitude. It's in the middle of our Great Dividing Range, and the altitude helps keep it cool. And if you were down on the plains there, it would probably be too hot to grow grapes. But yeah, places like Italy and Greece and Spain obviously have much warmer climates than France and Germany, and some of those grapes we are establishing out here. We have quite big areas now of grapes like Tempranillo and the Italian grapes like Sangiovese, and we're planting more and more of those, and we're getting good results in our warmer areas.
So tell me, without getting into a geopolitical discussion, what's the reaction of the old world to the new world, and in particular Australia rather than, say, Napa Valley? What's the reaction to those wine regions to what we're doing?
Well, I think you'd find the English are probably the best connoisseurs of wine. You might get a few arguments on that, but because until recently they haven't grown very much wine themselves in England, although England, the south part of England, is about on the same lump of chalk that the Champagne is grown in. That's the same patch of chalk that gives you the white cliffs of Dover and across there. But the English haven't grown very much wine until recently, where now, is it because of global warming? They're getting a little more temperature improvements in the south of England. They're growing quite a few wines there now. But the English have always been great appreciators of wine. probably more so than anyone else, because they didn't make their own wines, but they were great travellers and great connoisseurs. And some of the great appreciators of the French, German, Italian wines have been the English people. And Australia does sell its wines into England, where I think they are much appreciated. The English probably don't think that the best Australian wines are as good as the best French or Italian or German wines, but they do think that they're pretty good. You might not get a Frenchman to agree with that or an Italian to agree with that, but I think the world does realise that what places like California and Australia and South Africa and the Argentina, Chile, that they are making some very good wines which stand up to all but the very, very top European wines.
They seem to do very well. Our wines seem to do very well in blind taste tests, though, don't they?
Well, yes, they do, and because most of the wine areas in Europe are very, very strictly controlled, like the great wines of Bordeaux and Burgundy and Champagne and Riesling. They have very tight rules on how much you can actually grow, what amount of grapes you can pick, what levels of ripeness they have to be, what levels of alcohol there can be. And Australia had none of those rules. We can do what we like. We can grow any grape anywhere we like. We do have some rules, of course. If it says Cabernet on the front of the bottle, it's got to be 85% Cabernet. If it says it comes from Coonawarra, 85% has to come from Coonawarra. So there were those regulations to keep people honest. But we have no limitations on what we can grow. In Burgundy, they can grow Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, pretty well, full stop. In Bordeaux, they've got 6 grapes they can choose from, the Cabernet and the Merlot, Cabernet Franc. And in Champagne, they can only use 3 grapes. They can only use Chardonnay and Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. And that's it. And their regulations are very, very strict. We don't have those restrictions, so we can go pretty well as far as we like. For instance, a great red blend in Australia is Cabernet and Shiraz, which very few people in the world do. I mean, Cabernet is the grape of Bordeaux, and Shiraz is the grape a bit further down south of the Rhone Valley. And so the French wouldn't think of mixing those, but we do put them together, and we turn out some pretty spectacular wines, as judged by some of the best wine judges in the Americas and in Europe.
Speaking of America, which of our wines does the American palate seem to be attracted to?
I think the Americans probably, when it comes to fine wines, I think the Napa is famous for its Chardonnay and its Cabernet. And I think that the best Aussie Chardonnays, I think, would be appreciated by the Californians. And I think the best Australian Cabernets, Margaret River or Coonawarra, would be appreciated by an independent panel of California judges. But our big sellers in America have not been that. I mean, you've probably heard of Yellowtail. That comes from an area of Australia which is irrigated area in the Riverland and Riverina area, which is known for producing great volumes of pretty good grapes, a bit like the southern valleys. And so the wines are good, but they're not, you wouldn't call them great wines, but they're made to a price, and I think that's the sort of thing that's taken a large part of America by storm. But when you come to quality wines, I think the better winemakers in California and the better winemakers in Australia would sit down and cheerfully sit opposite each other and go eye to eye with their best wines.
Yeah, okay. Ian, I think that's a great foundation you've laid down for Australian wines, understanding them going forward for us and our listeners. That's terrific. I think what we'll do next time we do this is let's talk about the regions within Australia, how they compare against each other, like Riverland versus Coonawarra versus Tasmania, that sort of thing. And then also the different styles, how they compete against each other across the country. And then also I'd love to talk to you about sparkling and where we are in the world with sparkling, because I think that's an intriguing story in itself. So do you have any more to add to that foundational bit of knowledge now? Or
No, well, you've just given us 3 or 4 really good topics there, which we can certainly expand on. And it'd be great to get some feedback from people. If I obviously galloped through a lot of stuff in the last few minutes that some people might want to know a bit more about some of the details. So we'd be happy to pick up any suggestions and talk about those. But yeah, the topics you've just mentioned there, sparkling particularly, and the different regions, the divisions that are in areas and which grapes go best in those areas. Yeah, happy to talk about that.
And that's a great idea. So if you're listening to this and you want some more info on any topics we brought up or anything that you're just keen to understand about Australian wine, let us know. Email us. All those details are coming at the end of the show. Email us and let us know. And I'm sure Ian will do his best to answer all your questions. So Ian, thanks for that. I know you're in Sydney in these COVID days. Take care, and we'll talk soon.
We'll talk very soon. Thank you, Tim.
And that was the first episode of This Magnificent Life's Wine 2-3. If you have any wine questions, whether it's about Australian wine or not, it doesn't really matter, please send them in to us. Just email me, Tim, at thismagnificentlife.com. I'll put them to Ian and see if he can answer them for you. In the meantime, stay well, and remember, celebrate the people, places, tastes and experiences that make life magnificent.
Yes, it's 1, 2, 3. Simply 1, 2, 3. Easy as can be. Learning 1, 2, 3. Learning 1, 2, 3. Learning 1, 2, 3.